This episode is brought to you by Forethought. Most companies build their customer experience in pieces. Sales in one system, support in another, and onboarding somewhere else. Forethought brings it all together. Forethought is an AI system made up of advanced agents that handle sales, onboarding, support, and retention. Each team manages its own agents. The customer sees one unified experience. Forethought powers over 1 billion interactions every month for brands like Scale AI, Cohere, Airtable, and Upwork. Learn more at forethought.ai.
Welcome to the Cerebral Valley podcast. I'm Eric Newcomer. I'm here with Max.
Hey, Eric.
And James.
Happy to be here. Looking forward to the conference next week in London.
Next week. For our returning listeners, you know I'm Eric Newcomer, the author of the Newcomer newsletter, and I have Max Child and James Wilsterman, the co-founders of Volley and my co-hosts of the Cerebral Valley AI Summit. Some of the highlights will be in this podcast feed. They'll all be on our YouTube channel. We're going to hear from Dara Khosrowshahi, the CEO of Uber, Dylan Field, the CEO of Figma, Alex Kendall, the CEO of the self-driving car company Wave, Victor, the CEO of Synthesia, the CEOs of Lovable, Granola, Orbi, Crusoe, Photo Room. I'm not going to list them all. Lots of cool CEOs next week. And so Max, James, and I assign ourselves to come up with 3 themes each that hopefully are not just agents are important, and sort of talk through what we think some of the big themes are going to be, and therefore sort of think about what we want to hear from our panelists. Who wants to go first with one of their themes?
Yeah, so I think a big theme, especially since we have Dylan from Figma speaking, will be this evolution of the role of the designer. And maybe this will apply to other roles as well. But I think we're already seeing it a bit at Volley. Designers being able to make much more interactive, fully executed, programmable prototypes in a way that like really multiplies their impact, their speed to iteration.
Because they don't have to hand it off to a coder because they're building.
Exactly. We're cutting out that step in that early phase of design, or even for like things like internal tools, which don't have to be like fully perfect when they launch, right? We're allowing designers to kind of contribute directly to the engineering in a way that was never possible before. And I think that's just getting started. And I think Figma's leaning in there as well.
There was that old discussion back in the early days of streaming movies and TV where they were talking about at Netflix, like they were saying, you know, our goal is to become HBO before HBO can become Netflix, basically. And in the end, they kind of both won, but I guess you could probably say Netflix won a lot bigger based on the stock prices these days. But I think similarly, we're seeing internally and a lot of other folks we talk to that there's this question of like, do designers become engineers faster than engineers become designers? Or
I love it. That's great.
You could include product people as sort of part of the design cadre of like, you know, do designers and product managers become able to create software products faster than people who can already create great software products are empowered and able to design and ship and sort of finish complete, you know, products in a way that they weren't in the past? And I think that we've seen just amazing gains in the productivity of our engineering team, right? I mean, I think some people are like 3 to 5x as effective as they were a year ago. But I think you're really seeing like 0 to 1 games from the designers and the product folks who are now making websites and making mock-ups and making internal tools and pages and stuff that literally they could not have done any of 6 to 12 months ago. So there's a true kind of step change happening. And I think obviously Figma and a lot of other folks are kind of on the cutting edge.
Sort of Lovable from the other end.
And Lovable, of course.
So we're going to have both of them.
Yeah. Do you want to explain Lovable for our audience? I feel like some people might not be familiar.
It's for people like me. It's for no code, people who have no sense of code. I mean, literally, I think you have to imagine you're taking a screenshot of a website you like, sending that to Lovable and saying like, build this with XYZ, you go back and forth with it. And it's just like, it's building with you.
Is the preferred flow that you take a screenshot of a website, by the way?
I don't think they're selling that, but I think people understate that. Like so much of what's great about AI in every domain is that it's really good at ripping things off. And so Lovable works really well when you're like, I like the New York Times. I like the Substack design. Why don't you borrow from that? Here's my color palette. You know, you can give it, you know, your logos and I'll put them in and I'll take your color palette, but it's really sometimes good at being derivative.
Yeah, well, you got to speak to your personal experience, right? Like you tried to build a full website on Lovable, right? And you've never, you should explain this whole experience. What happened?
I was trying to make like sort of a news aggregation site, basically, like get the top headlines in tech news. And so I could build like a comment function, and, you know, it was pretty cool. But then I got hung up.
You got stuck.
I moved this button, and like, no matter how many times and ways I'd ask it, and you know, you'd be taking your conversation and dumping it into Anthropic and ChatGPT, and still it just like, for whatever reason, it just like, it got stuck. So I had sort of something visually cool, but then it didn't turn into anything.
So you sort of had this last mile problem. I think this is another, I don't know if this is a theme of the conference.
Theme. We didn't put it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah.
That's not one of our official themes, or it could be, because that's good, because we have the self-driving car companies, and they are the sort of test case of the sort of, you have to get the last 1%, you get the last 5%. And a lot of these products look really good, and then I like it. Last mile problem. That's a good one.
The last mile problem is the overall theme of the conference. I think Lovable really gives you that last mile problem experience where you feel like you could build 98% of the website, but it doesn't work without the last 2%. And you're like, God, I was so close. And the question is, with the next generation of models or the next generation of tools, or just Lovable itself becomes better, you know, do we cross that last mile? You know, I don't know, James, you've experienced this from the engineering side of things.
Someone was tweeting about this idea that coding models would allow finally everyone to complete those like 90 side projects that they have sitting around on their computers that they have just been, you know, tinkering on for decades but never get finished. And Sam Altman responded and said, like, yeah, so excited to see all those projects get finished. But I actually think the opposite is happening, to me at least, where it's like 10xing the number of side projects that I have that are unfinished.
You're like, now I have 900 unfinished side
now
projects.
I have 900 unfinished.
Sweet.
Yeah, so I definitely think this is an issue, but I don't know, every few months or weeks even, it seems like the models get more capable, and it allows me to make more progress. So it's less that I'm worried that this is like a never-ending.
Someday you'll have 100 projects come out. They're all sort of like hitting, they're all getting close. You're building them in parallel.
Right. And then one day I'll just... the last mile will just be completed for all of them.
I mean, but that is sort of how, you know, AI people can sort of talk about, you know, the singularity or AGI. It's like, oh, we're going to have drug discovery. We're going to have this boom, you know, which, you know, I don't think we're necessarily closed off to, but yeah, there is this sort of like mode of all at once.
Yeah, true. The takeoff, fast takeoff, or
fast takeoff.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. I have a theme that's sort of related to your design one. Yours is really from like the employee perspective. This is from maybe corporate strategy, but the theme is text box versus product. Like, I think ChatGPT has introduced this idea that like a company, you know, you can just have the company in a text box. And in some ways, like Lovable is that. In some ways, Figma, which is like a very intentionally designed product, now feels the threat of like, oh, we need our almost text box solution. And so I think there's a real question of the moment is, do people want to interact with their tech products by typing to them? Or is that just sort of the kludgy interim solution before people build great product design around the capabilities of AI?
I mean, I think this actually comes back a little bit to some of the voice discussion we had last time, but our sort of general thesis at our company, Volley, is there's really only like two ways people actually interface with the world, interact with the world, right? And it's basically like with your hands, you know, obviously touching a screen, typing on a keyboard, whatever, playing with a game controller, or by talking essentially, or outputting words, right? And obviously, you know, you're using typing as the sort of the current way we put words into a computer, but like we believe the future will be talking into a computer rather than typing into a computer. But I do think basically, if you say, hey, humans only have two ways to do anything in the world, right? With their hands or with their mouths.
Except for some reason, driving a car, which
that's with a hands product.
No, your
I mean,
feet, your
steering wheel. Okay, we use your feet occasionally for, you know, other things. But
I've always found that kind of bizarre that we trust our feet as with only one task, the most important task.
Anyway,
most dangerous.
The point I would be making, besides the pedal-driven Photoshop that James is imagining here, was that to date, you know, most creative software has either either been, point and click, drag and drop, move a mouse, or move your fingers touching, or it's been, typing in a box. And I just think that the headroom for what you can do typing in a box is probably
You're bullish
10 or 100x what we have done to date, because it is one of the major ways humans interface with the world. It's how we're interfacing right now on this podcast, right? Anytime you do a phone call,
what we're not doing on this podcast, we're using Riverside right now, which is like Zoom effectively. Yes. It's like we didn't fire this up and be like, "Ooh, what tools do we want? We need a producer to be able to be in the background. We need to be able to toggle what camera we want." It's just like using a text box is like deriving from first principles. Like everything you want for I was creating cute images for my wife last night on ChatGPT, and it's like you have to ask it like, oh yeah, what are the different like color graphic types that you probably do, and it's like you have to reinvent it every time. I just think the text box is not ideal for most of the use cases in great product design.
I don't think it's ideal for many use cases that we have developed to date, and I think those aren't going away anywhere. I don't think that like the concept of a Photoshop Figma type experience or things like that are going to disappear. But to me, it seems clear that like anytime you want a piece of information or you want, a fairly simple action carried out on your behalf, it's much easier to just put that request out in the world as text, explain to me this thing, go research this thing, go do this simple thing, even something as simple as like, DoorDash ordering agent, which we don't have today. But if you were like, oh yeah, go order the pepperoni pizza I always order from this place, like, and have it at my house in under an hour, like that is still easier than the 95 clicks it takes to do it in DoorDash, if that actually worked, right? So I think there's a sort of a U-curve of complexity where if you get really, really high complexity tasks, then of course you're going to want to use your hands and drag and drop and touch things and so on. But there's lots of low complexity tasks or even medium complexity tasks that you could do fairly easily with text or with your voice.
And it's almost like you can do it faster that way because
it's much faster.
Yeah, like you don't have to like learn the interface.
It would be much faster if Siri actually worked and I was driving home from work and I was like, hey, like order me the pho, I get like for dinner or whatever, and they'll be like, oh yeah, the pho from this place, it's like, it's $15. And I'll be like, yeah, done. Right? If that worked, that would be better than using DoorDash.
I think, and I mean, taking the Riverside podcast recording application as an example here, there aren't that many buttons. Like we kind of just send out a link and join.
Oh
but
my
maybe,
God. No, they're way more than you think. Like I feel like
do you use them all though? I think like if there was a little voice agent or text box here where you could be like, accessing the deeper features of Riverside, then you might actually use them.
The beauty is it's suggesting functionality that I wouldn't even necessarily have imagined,
Right.
Yeah. I mean, presenting those affordances on screen visually is still valuable. We're not saying get rid of that. We're just saying doing stuff is easier.
Isn't it a pretty big coincidence that like we've decided that text is a great way to like create products just as like that's the most straightforward way to build them? I don't know.
It's not a coincidence. It's literally how humans communicate, right? I mean, you use Slack. I know you use Slack because we're on a Slack together, right? You text message your friends. We text message each other all the time.
You're a writer. Your product is words in a box.
Literally, your product is an email newsletter, right? Yeah,
I know.
How many times a day do you use text in a box in some way or another, right?
I've been seeing a resurgence of that graphic of like Craigslist where
the unbundling of Craigslist.
Of Craigslist.
Oh my God, yeah.
Like, and then is that going to happen with ChatGPT? I think that sort of gets to some of the questions that we're asking here. I'm curious if you guys have any ideas of like what do you think would be unbundled from ChatGPT? Is it going to be like this therapist use case, or like is it just the most popular use cases, or is it the most valuable use case? Like what startups would you actually build to unbundle ChatGPT?
That's a good question. I mean, obviously you would want something that's reasonably popular. I do think, just off the top of my head, I think the therapy use case is probably one that will be unbundled because I think that there's probably going to be some sort of like AMA compliant version of a GPT therapist at some point, some sort of like actual doctor endorsed or doctor founded or, psychologist approved version of the sort of GPT therapist. And I think that will probably unbundle some of that use case. I do think like you and I are obviously sort of in the early days on this, but we both have kids. And I think that childhood education use cases from GPT will definitely get unbundled in some way, where like a lot of parents are talking to GPT now being like, explain gamma rays and x-rays to my kid because they just watched Incredible Hulk or whatever, right? And there's like definitely some sort of very focused educational, I think, use case.
I just think everything that's useful, either people will train it better or they will
build a product around it.
Build
that's
product
better.
around it that suggests what features are hidden inside of ChatGPT. Instead of having this thing you need to pull out, it'll market to you. Oh, here are the different things that you can do in this category. And I mean, there's value in the marketing alone, right? Because the marketing alone, just to have somebody yelling at you, you can do this cool thing here. You know, like I wouldn't have thought about it unless you're telling me. The problem is ChatGPT, you know, it's like do anything. That's too broad.
I do think we're talking about separate things. I guess I would say like, I think a lot of these unbundlings, like James and I are doing an unbundling of GPT where we're building, you know, Dungeons and Dragons, GPT wrapper in some sense, right? You still want the text input and the voice input to be like a big way that people play the game, right? You might want them to be able to click on things. You want to be able to show characters on screen. You want to be able to make cool art of the monsters and environments.
D&D is an argument for the text box rather than the product as I'm framing it. I'm just saying that I think that's sort of the first order reaction, and that then it's like, oh, we need to go to move back.
But even with the
from
educational use case, I still think even if you have a bunch of stuff on screen, like my daughter's learning to read right now, you want to show the different sounds and how she's sounding them out. And she has to be able to tap, you know, the versus the ba or whatever. But like you also want in a sane world, her to be able to say, you know, rat versus cat and have it be like, you said rat, that was correct, you know? So, you know, and she can't type yet, but there's obviously both text input and touch input, which is kind of the point I was trying to make up.
Yeah, and I like your overall frame. The point is that ChatGPT has unlocked what was a very natural way of communicating that we couldn't with machines before. So.
Right. Yeah, it just unlocks a lot of new opportunities, more exploration in a lot of ways, because you can just ask the thing if it can do the thing that comes in your head versus before you had to like dig in through menus, as James said.
Can I share? Can you guys see?
Yes, the Anthropic use case map here.
Oh, I actually haven't seen this.
This is super interesting, right? This is
is this their agent guidebook?
This is how they built their multi-agent research system.
I was going to read this today, actually. Yeah,
but then,
I'm excited.
Then at the bottom, they said embedding plots showing the most common ways people are using the research feature. So not necessarily just generic Claude, but there was some really interesting stuff here, like translating documents between languages, developing advanced automated trading systems and strategies, researching pharmacological and performance-handling substance innovations. So I think to me, all of these are like good candidates, right, for being kind of unbundled.
Unbundled?
To spin it a different way, these are all valuable, wonky things that companies have a lot of incentive to do the hard way.
Yes.
And in some ways, what people aren't doing are the cool but chill consumer things that aren't worth figuring out how to do. And there you need a company to really tell people, oh, you should be doing this here. It's good for this thing you haven't thought of.
And like if it analyzed sports betting odds gets its own little thing here, like anything that involves like potentially making money, obviously monetizing.
It's like, oh, I've discovered something fundamental about human beings here.
Yeah. I mean, I think that like the sports betting odds is a good example because the people who need that or want it, like really badly want it, but it's objectively just not that large of an industry, right? I mean, like sports betting is, you know, there's lots of money in sports betting, don't get me wrong, but it's not like the size of like, you know, enterprise software or whatever silly stuff we talk about on the show. So I just think that it's an interesting example of like, the market size of sports betting odds analysis is probably not that big. So maybe there's like, you know, one company that could really execute well on that, but it's also possible that just like individual bettors will fine tune Claude and, you know, figure out how to develop cutting edge strategies.
No, I think Claude could be strong in all these. All right, next theme. Max, you're up.
Yeah, next theme. A lot less sexy, but I do think something that I keep thinking about with Granola, which is one of our speakers at the conference, which is a meeting notes, recording and summarization analysis tool, is this idea of like, is there a sort of Microsoft Office suite for the AI era or not, right? And I look, I warned you this wasn't
when you
a
said
sexy
not
topic.
Sexy, I was oh man, I couldn't even. I underestimated.
I'll try to. I'm a consumer founder, so I'll try to make this as fun and interesting as possible. But we all grew up with Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, and they're
some
not
of the most
cool,
valuable things in the world, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. Outlook, right? Yeah, I mean they're literally worth like $1 trillion if you added them together, right? And which is
insane.
40 years of lock-in for Microsoft, and one of the most durable businesses of all time. Right. Okay, so finally, for the first time in our lives, I feel like people are starting to do interesting things where they're taking a different layer of work, right? And they're saying, hey, instead of I'm going to do documents as sort of the fundamental layer of work, I'm going to do like conversations and interactions and sort of insights from those meetings and those discussions, right? And I guess the question is, is there a different slice of work where AI can capture, every meeting you have, every email you send, every time you talk to someone, and then also suck in all these documents and kind of create like a higher level abstraction of how we do work. And I think that is kind of what Granola is going for. It's also what Notion's going for. It's also what Glean's going for. It's also what OpenAI is going for.
Right. That's what I was going to say. That's what I was going to say.
Right.
That's what ChatGPT should be that. I mean, if Word is everything.
Want to be.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, I'm in ChatGPT. I'm doing the thinking. And if writing is sort of like an output or a part of the thinking process, capturing some of that in a document makes so much sense. I think I'm pretty bullish on OpenAI.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is James and I went through a discovery process at our company where we were like, hey, we need one of these tools that like sucks in everything, every document that Volley has ever created or interacted with. So Dropbox and all these Word files and, Notion notes we've written to each other and so on and so forth. And we realized like no one really has all the pieces of the puzzle right now. Like OpenAI just announced that they're going to have almost everything, but they don't have Notion docs, and we use Notion. And then like Glean has like almost everything, but they're missing something else. And then, like Granola is very early. They really just have meeting notes. So like no one's put together the sort of coherent, like, hey, you only need to sign up for this, which is sort of what Microsoft Office did in the good old days. And so I think OpenAI wants to do that. And I think Notion and Glean both want to do that too. And it's unclear to me who's going to get there first, because I think OpenAI has got a lot of other stuff on their plate.
I was thinking this was going to be one of my themes, but since we're talking about it, I do think there's actually kind of that war kind of brewing of who owns the context, right? Like there's a reason Notion doesn't want to be able to be exported into ChatGPT. Right, there's also like this kind of counter force or counter trend where everyone's trying to come up with like the protocol or kind of open source version of how you provide context into models, like the model context protocol, right?
What are we calling this theme?
Well, the theme is the war for context or something. Or,
open versus closed for the 8th time.
Yeah, true. I think Google I don't know if they've fixed this recently, but when I tried to integrate Google Docs and Drive and Gmail into OpenAI a few weeks ago, it was like a 60-step process that also involved setting up a Google Cloud project in order to expose the information. And OpenAI has a document of like how to do this, and it's literally like 60 steps.
Oh my God. I want that so bad.
Google doesn't want this in ChatGPT. Notion doesn't want it in ChatGPT. At the same time, some companies like Linear are, intentionally leaning into MCP because they do kind of want you to be able to edit and interact with your tasks through Linear.
MCP?
Model context protocol. It's like
the new way, neutral way that everyone interacts with each other. Yeah. Sorry, I heard that before, but that wasn't for me. That was for the poor listener who doesn't know what's going on.
Sure. No, MCP will probably be something that comes up a lot at the conference too. That's been a hot topic for sure.
Do you want to explain it for the audience, James?
Sure. I guess it was created by Anthropic, and it's designed to expose context to agents where they are in operating, right? So if you think of like Cursor has an MCP connectors, I could go build an MCP server myself and put a bunch of context accessible to that MCP server. I could expose it in Cursor. So now, for example, all of our Volley developers could have access to like a style guide or a Volley recommended documentation or things like that, right?
So it's basically a way to share data into these LLM
This
and
prevents
agent.
lock-in and allows you to be open source to have an agent one place and have all your data somewhere else.
Yeah, and it also starts to allow you to expose tools to those agents too, right? So your MCP server could expose tools from Linear, for example, that would allow the agent to go update the ticket or close it out or kind of interact. So yeah, I think it's just one agreed upon or neutral protocol, right, for exposing this stuff to agents.
I mean, it does feel like everyone's kind of gotten wise from the last few generations of these corporate battles over who owns owns
we
the
don't,
data.
We don't need
right?
antitrust. We just need good competitive incentives.
Well, I feel like everyone's like, no. I'm not going to give you my data. Why don't you give me your data? And it's like, no. Trust me. Just give me your data, and we'll send you more traffic, and it'll all be good. And that's basically what happened. What Google did and what Facebook did and whatever. And so, like, I think everyone's getting pretty smart now. Where like Notion isn't sharing their data with OpenAI, and to your point, it takes 60 steps to get Google Docs into OpenAI now. And so, like, everybody's like, no, how about you give me what you know and I'll be the one box to rule them all for everyone.
Right. All right. Let's move on to the next theme. I'm only one for 3 down. How many themes have we covered here?
One of mine was kind of vibe coding, which we covered with the design thing. So I sort of just have one more. So it's fine.
Okay, you have one more. So I have 2 more left.
Yeah, you go for it.
This one, I didn't need to give a clever name. The term itself is ominous, but surveillance state. I think, we've got granola, which obviously requires a level of everybody's getting recorded. So we have this question of are we all getting listened to all the time? And then the other big one that's relevant right now is self-driving cars. I mean, I'm very hostile to Waymo's getting attacked, but you did see, I think it was Taylor Lorenz did an interesting YouTube video where she was talking about it. I like self-driving cars, but they are recording protesters everywhere. It is just like another piece of the sort of, we're constantly being monitored. I have never been, I'm not a big privacy person, so it's not like I'm like up in arms about it, but I've always not really cared about privacy. I'm, as you guys know, an oversharer, but it's surprising to me that privacy is not a larger part of the criticism of AI because so much of this stuff requires like ubiquitous surveillance.
There's also that New York Times court order that requires OpenAI to store and save every chat you've ever interacted with on the platform.
Which is pretty wild, I think. I think it's a massive overreach from the judge, but whatever.
Yeah.
Requiring them to store every single thing everyone types into ChatGPT for the purposes of the lawsuit. I don't know. I think that's complete bullshit.
That said, I was just using ChatGPT last night to create Pokemon, and I'm like, how is this legal? Like, not even new Pokemon, just like, hey, make an image of a Pokemon, and it's like, sure, happy to. I know all the Pokemon. It's just like, isn't that the most blatant copyright? I know you can draw, but like.
We're in the golden age for IP theft,
somebody should
baby.
They have to sort of keep all this stuff they're creating because it's like, oh man, there are gonna be lawsuits for like ages.
Well, that's fair. Yeah, I think I'm more worried about like the law enforcement angle to it. Like, will everyone who gets arrested have to turn over their ChatGPT history?
I'm super
right?
scared about that. Yeah. Was it Sam Altman? Somebody was suggesting a new set of legal principles. Yeah.
Right.
I think Sam Altman was saying it needs to be like your therapist or your attorney, which I totally agree with. I don't think it should be unique to AI. I think it's insane that they can force you to use your face to open an iPhone. Like I think all that stuff should be sacrosanct.
I think Google history, right, is clearly subpoenaable or something, right?
Yeah, that's scary. I know.
So
you should be able to try to figure out how to get away with murder. It's
the only
we can't Google. How are we supposed to murder anybody?
How to do insider trading comes up a lot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like what I can't do anything.
Right.
If our brains are dependent on Google and OpenAI, like they're just literally gonna just stop murders. It's not.
Well, maybe we can now say, "Oh, that was my agent. I wasn't telling it to."
Plausible deniability.
Yeah.
Like, that would actually be an interesting privacy strategy. It's like, I create a bunch of weird shit all the time to distract from my digital record of like what is actually
I gave my
me.
browser usage tool on ChatGPT access and said go wild so that
Right.
you can
Please obscure the weird shit I do with other weird shit so nobody can prove which ones are me and which ones are the agent. That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, as to your surveillance state point, I think there's like two separate points, right? One is like having cameras all around us all the time out in public, right? Which I feel like most Western countries have already done anyway. Like, I mean, sad to say, but almost in any like European country or Asian country or much of the United States, if you're in public, you're probably on camera already. Like, so I guess that doesn't stress me out that much that there's even more cameras owned by Google. Like, I mean, literally every single person has a phone with 3 cameras on it in their pocket that they can pull out at any time.
It's good.
So,
I mean, we just had the manhunt over this terrible Minnesota killing, and it's like that guy's in the woods, but it's still like you've got to imagine they've got like, cameras everywhere going after
so
this
like
guy.
I'm not saying there is an opportunity for like civil rights violations. Obviously there is, but I don't think it's been like this horrible thing that we're all being filmed all the time when we weren't, you know, 20 or 30 years ago. I do think the other one, the interesting question is like, yeah, the work, you know, listening to all your meetings, monitoring stuff that Granola and a bunch of other people are doing now. There's a separate question as to like the legality of that
conversation is being recorded that we're having.
Oh yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah.
take off your tinfoil hat, Eric.
Yeah, exactly. I think there are people listening to us as we speak.
Yes. So I have like sort of a hot take that I'm not sure I 100% believe, but I will say, which is that, you know, athletes, right, from the moment they're like 5 years old at this point, have every single moment on the court or on the field like filmed, right? And then they go home and, you know, when they're young, it's with their parents or with their, you know, coaches, and they review the tape. And then as they get older, you know, if they get into the NFL, they literally spend like, I think 90% of the workload of an NFL player is like reviewing tape, right? Watching tape, right? And so I sort of think of like maybe we're entering this world where we all have a lot more like game tape, you know, of how we're acting in work settings, and in particular, I think.
Somebody at YC is like, that moment, that's where you weren't grinding hard enough. You should have been grinding right there, and you weren't.
Right. Well, it's like, again, I just think the athlete analogy is interesting, right? Because no one's like, oh, we shouldn't like track how many like points Kevin Durant scored, right? Because like it would be embarrassing if he had a bad night, you know? And it's like, oh, we shouldn't like have a stopwatch like on the track because like what if some of the kids are slower than the other kids?
Nice about a game. Like, it's not it's you're making a lot. It is their job. Scrutinized, you know? As much. It's a specific window.
There was outrage from the previous YSC batch, right? There was that outrage over that manufacturing startup that was monitoring via video behavior.
Well, they leaned into they wanted, I think, some of the backlash to get attention.
I mean, they film every practice, so whatever. Let's not get too hung up on the analogy. They film every practice. Baseball players play 160 games a year. Like whatever number you want to come up with in terms of how much game tape is being produced, I think it's fairly comparable to going to work. So yeah, I think it's an interesting question. Like, is there a way to use it in a way which like makes you more effective or more creative, or, you know, only do the parts of your job you're good at that you like, and maybe, you know, other people get retasked on the parts you're not good at? Or, you know, like, can we see more self-improvement in life if we're like actually tracking how we're doing? And I agree there's a ton of like Big Brother crap where it's like, I don't want my boss like watching every meeting and like judging every single remark I've made, but like having quote unquote game tape for your job seems like it's going to be a part of all of our lives, whether we want it to or not.
I think people will want this in a way that acts as sort of like a coach. So I think I'm not sure about the actual mechanics of the storage of the data and whether your boss has access to it, but I think a lot of people would want sort of this new, you know, like we all have with ChatGPT, this sort of neutral party to, you know, receive advice from, right? What if you can do that at work, right? Without it kind of having to be a conversation with your manager, right? So someone's kind of monitoring your work, an agent in this case, and it's able to give you very clear, actionable feedback that doesn't come off as impersonal because it's coming from your agent. So I don't know. I think people might actually like that.
I mean, therapy is, you know, one of the most popular uses of these chatbots. Yeah. It used to be like, oh, somebody could gaslight you and you're like, oh, maybe. But now you put the chatbot and it's like, oh, there's a neutral party. And it's like, no, I'm getting gaslit. I'm the one who's getting screwed over. Like, the terrifying version of this, I think, to fit into surveillance state again, is just like, just imagine, you know, things that matter for me, right? Like my employees are reacting to me, or like I'm sourcing someone, it's all recorded. And then I get the play by play afterwards from the AI. And it's like, you know, that moment where their eyes darted to the side, they thought you were bullshitting them. You know, it's like if you have a really sort of a high EQ AI, which seems very plausible, honestly, some of the readouts on how you're being perceived could be pretty brutal. You know, it's like there's a level of social interaction that depends on getting away with people being like, oh yeah, if you really scrutinize their face, you could have been able to tell that that person thought you were an idiot right there, but like best for everybody that was not communicated.
And I do think the level of self-consciousness that this will induce, if we all have glasses that are reading everyone's faces and giving us live feedback all the time, like
that subtle micro expression that you're only supposed to sort of understand. Now you're getting a readout of what it was meant to say. That's like, I don't know.
That sounds bad.
I think the granola, the story with granola makes us realize like whether or not we have glasses, like these things will be just running on people's computers, right? So if any Zoom meeting, like, that someone could be recording it without really you knowing. Maybe they're not supposed to do that, but that's clearly happening. And then if any of these video learning models get to the point where you can, like you said, you know, kind of just detect facial expressions, that'll just be running without you knowing as well. So I don't even think it's a risk just for glasses. Like it's a risk today with Zoom.
Because Zoom, basically your computer is a giant glass.
Yeah,
you know, I mean,
exactly.
Whatever. It's a giant pair of eyeglasses over your meeting. So
that's Cluey, right? Cluey is pitching that you can cheat on anything through your because you can run.
Cluey,
sorry, Cluey.
I mean, the defense of granola is that in some ways they are not keeping the recording. They're trying to like sort of like, okay, let's kill some of the parts that people don't like. You know, there are ways that we could, you know, tweak them so that it's like just the level of social comfort and not too much.
But they're pumping the recording to either Sam Altman or DeepMind or whatever. I mean, it's going to somebody. Like, I mean, the recording's like,
but like,
going
you think
somewhere.
the recording is kept? I don't think it's. That's like saying Zoom is kept.
Whether or not, but whether or not it's kept, whether or not it's kept or it's being used to train the next generation of models, like, I don't believe it's not going somewhere where somebody's getting value out of it. I'm not saying there's a pile of all my granola recordings sitting somewhere, but like, first of all, they let you chat with the transcript. So they stored the entire transcript.
Right. Definitely. There's a transcript there. You can see it yourself.
You're just saying the actual audio. Right.
I'm saying the audio. I'm just saying there are ways that even what we're capable of doing, you can build a product that's more appealing to people that says, okay, we'll do this and not this.
I feel like that's a pretty trivial distinction.
Yeah. I think it's going to be an arms race, and we're all, you know, going to keep escalating this thing.
Yeah, I agree. Basically,
because if you're probably recording me, then I should probably be recording in case you sue me, so I have the transcript too. You know,
right?
Yeah. All right. Next theme.
I have a last theme, and you guys can decide if you think it's interesting enough or not. We can just cut it. But I think that
will this one make the air? Let's see. Yeah.
You know, there's this sort of brewing Uber versus Waymo, Uber working with Waymo, right? Like there's the classic good old fashioned distribution versus product technology, you know, showdown happening in all these different areas, right? So Uber obviously has a massive amount of distribution.
So this is product versus distribution. Is that what we're calling this?
Product versus distribution. Exactly. Yeah. Right. Product or, you know, technology versus distribution, whatever. Right. So like, is it better to be Uber and have spent 15 years getting billion people installing your app and knowing it's how you call a car? Or is it better to be Waymo and have all the self-driving technology? Or is there some grand, you know, Pax Romana in the future in which they work together and they both succeed, right? I don't really know the
James,
answer, but I think
the question.
Yeah, James, just give me a straight answer here.
My current take is, at least in San Francisco, you're seeing the Waymo success, right?
Okay, yeah.
It surpassed Lyft, I think, and almost caught up to Uber in terms of number of rides. It's a better experience in many ways. I think people don't even know how to explain why it's better. It's just that they like being alone, maybe, without a driver.
I mean, I think Uber needs this technology to get commoditized as quickly as possible. It's like there are self-driving cars in China. They're partnering with Wave, who we're having. Yeah. They need enough self-driving car companies that their distribution, because honestly, it's like their distribution will last unless there's this disruptive product that's superior that people prefer. And so if there can be multiple self-driving car companies, then I think their distribution is strong. But if they're competing in these markets where there's only one self-driving car company, then I think it's hard.
Yeah. Well, maybe it'll be that there's different companies that succeed in different regions, right? And then you're like, oh, I'm traveling to New York. I don't want to have to like learn which.
Exactly. I think Uber has that case that we're international. Like, do you want a different app for every city?
But I mean, that's kind of a big deal if Uber ends up losing here, right? Which I know we're a long way away from, but like, Because so much of what the sort of received wisdom of the startup world was, hey, distribution matters more than products. Network effects are extremely strong and take a long time to break. Brand matters a lot. Habit formation matters a lot. It's almost exactly what you're hearing Sam Altman say about ChatGPT being more valuable than the underlying models, because he says, well, we have 500 million weekly users of ChatGPT, and that's ultimately more important than who has the best model in a given week. It's like literally exactly the pitch I would make if I were Uber, right? About why Uber is a great business. It's because everybody already knows Uber. They already know how to use it. And like ultimately all the underlying technology will probably, get commoditized and will kind of hang in there. So like maybe that is what will happen and the technology will get commoditized and Uber will be fine. But if not, I think a lot of startup conventional wisdom kind of like has been wrong over the last 15 years or 20 years.
I don't know. I think this is a case where this would be considered sort of separately from ChatGPT. Like this is more of a sustaining innovation, right? Where it's like a better product that maybe even is more expensive, not less expensive, right? And it does the exact same thing in a better way. So the only question is, why does the network effect not matter? But the network effect is mostly about drivers. So the network effect doesn't matter because you don't need drivers. So I think it's a very straightforward success case for Waymo if that plays out that way.
Sure, but is that a failure case for Uber or not, I guess?
Well, yeah, I think that that's the failure case, right? Is they didn't invest in the technology.
Okay.
They just got beat. They got beat on the exact product that they offer, right? Yeah.
Uber clearly needs non-Waymos to have competitive self-driving. I feel like that's unquestionable. And I think the reality is China is a strong proof point that exists. And so to me, that's a signal that Waymo will face serious competition, which I think will be good for Uber. And I think it's going to be hard for companies like Tesla gets more credit for self-driving than Uber, and they're going to have a hard time building this network. And so if I'm like, who's more overhyped on self-driving, Uber or Tesla? I definitely think it's Tesla.
I guess when I actually think of how it will play out and not like what's happening right now in San Francisco, I think I have more faith in Uber because I do believe that the technology will get commoditized. Like I think, and it'll just take a while. It'll take, 5 years or something, but I think there'll be like an after market for this technology. So then anyone can, have it in their car, and suddenly anyone can add their car to the Uber fleet or something, right? And that's just not going to be how Waymo operates. Even Tesla, right? They're more focused on selling their brand of cars, right? So yeah, I kind of think once this commoditizes, all of a sudden it's like, then it's Uber's ballgame. But it'll take a while. So in the meantime, you're going to see like certain cities that get density of Teslas or Waymos, like just completely destroying Uber in those regions.
All right. I have a last theme: sprinting until the end of history. I just feel like, like if you look at coding, you look at it, and now we talk about self-driving, there's so many of these things where it's like you can sort of game out how the world could get revolutionized. And it's almost like demotivating. It's like, you have to build, the world keeps changing. You have to build really fast with the idea that if you are in the best position when this big inflection point comes, you'll, have distribution, or you'll be the power player and you'll be able to lock it in perpetuity. But in the moment, it's sort of the opposite. It's like the technology is ubiquitous. Everybody is very competitive with each other. And so the only way that you stay ahead is that you keep improving the product. And so it's this sprint with this desired like stability point.
Wait, so what is the question there?
It's not a question. It's a theme. It's like, the question to you is, for this to be falsifiable, I guess, I think we are in a moment now where there's intense pressure to self-disrupt, to embrace the current technology, right? Like Figma, obviously, is a great example
100%.
where it is like a pretty recent startup that feels a lot of pressure to match the current generation of startups, and that basically, and Notion and Airtable, and like every generation of still hip, pretty recent startups feels like they need to meet the current product inflection point in a case that hasn't always been the case. And so it feels like, man, we just did all this sprinting and now we're a big, pretty stable company about to go public. Like, obviously you have to continue to grow, but Airbnb wasn't totally asked to like reinvent the wheel, into the IPO. But I feel like it's this sprint at the moment.
It kind of gets to James's earlier point about not to get like too nerdy about this, but the disruption versus sustaining innovations,
Yeah,
right?
explain
the idea
that to me.
like,
I actually don't know the difference.
so this is like, this is the classic Clayton Christensen Innovator's Dilemma book, which was very popular like 10, 15 years ago, and now seems to have gone out of fashion. I feel like no one's really read it anymore, but we read it. And it's about how there's two types of new businesses or new innovations in a market, right? One is sustaining, which is it makes the product better and it's quickly adopted by the existing companies. So kind of what you're describing, where like Figma sees AI and they're like, oh, we got to plug in these sort of lovable style creation tools into Figma because it's going to make our existing customer base more powerful. And maybe we'll grab an adjacent customer base, which is this vibe coding group that wants to, just design things and then put them into production. And so it's sort of like, I think electric cars is a classic example where a lot of companies are adopting electric because it is an innovation in a drivetrain for cars, but ultimately you still have to make cars and it doesn't change the way cars work or who you sell them to. And the idea of disruption is you might have an innovation that makes a product in an existing category worse, but that appeals to a completely different audience, right? And I think frequently debated, but one of the most popular disruption narratives of our lifetime is the iPhone, which is it disrupted the PC industry because what people used for computing before the iPhone was, computers that sat on their desks or desktops, and they did a lot of serious work with it. And the iPhone brought computing from something that maybe 500 million people had a computer to something that 5 billion people or nearly every person on the planet. And they do all these things that we would have called computing on their iPhones, like editing photos and browsing the web and sending email and calling Ubers and so on and so forth. And so that was like a disruptive market opening up where there was 4.5 billion people who didn't have a computer, but then this new form factor and this new price point and this new business model kind of opened up this big new market, right? And I think that what you're asking is like, hey, is this a sustaining innovation or a disruptive innovation? A lot of this AI stuff, like, is this going to create brand new audiences, brand new markets, or is this just going to make some of these existing products better? I don't know, James, does that summarize accurately?
Yeah. To Eric's question, I would just say that I feel from the founder perspective, like a lot of founders are really energized over this, right? You see like people like Dylan leaning in and wanting to ship new features because of just how much better they can make Figma and how much more effective. I agree with you. There's like probably a capitalist imperative here or something. But I also think, I do see a lot of founders just like excited about what's possible.
But I think there's an additional element here that companies that once felt like they were in different categories feel like they're colliding, right? We talked earlier, you're a word processor, now you're competing with like the search disruptor. It just feels like every company could potentially compete with each other. And so I think that's creating this sense that you can at once be a really buzzy startup worth endless amounts of money, and you feel all the pressure on all sides because you could get competed with from all these different vectors.
Yeah, there's like new fronts in every direction that you have to fight. New startups, the incumbents, the growth companies, all they're all battling each other in new ways.
It's a little bit of like a vibes-based assessment, but I think a lot of the time when you see a disruptive innovation, it's disdained by the existing players, disdained by the existing companies. They consider it beneath them or sort of fundamentally sort of condescend towards it. And I think that the like Apple's attitude towards AI gives off a lot of disruptive vibes where they sort of disdainfully talk about chatbots and how nobody wants chatbots, in
Max
their
used to
iOS.
love Apple. You have the deep love for Apple, but you're like, oh,
I love Apple,
it.
but I call it like I see it. They were great. Now I think they've got some questions there. But like, I think that Apple's attitude towards AI is
Gruber, so goes the nation.
I think Apple's attitude towards AI is disdainful, right? Now that might change. They might have a leadership transition in which they figure it out a little bit more. But I think that that's sort of an interesting way to think about it. And it seems like today in the industry, there's just so much energy. Whereas maybe if you look at, I don't know, the legal profession would be an interesting disruption candidate, right? Like, do the 70-year-old partners at Wachtell Lipton take AI seriously, or are they disdainful towards AI? Like, my guess would be more on the disdainful side,
it's
right?
Like writers are disdainful. I think a lot of the
writers,
services
Hollywood.
Exactly.
So,
I love
when
the
you
mental model. Just anyone who reacts too negatively to it, you're fucked. And if you're taking it in stride, you'll be okay.
That's just like a signal, right? Like a signal to check on them.
It's not
like,
proof. proof.
Yeah.
I know. It's just like
Yeah.
a warning
Yeah.
sign. Yeah.
Yeah, it's when some people think something interesting is happening, but then the existing incumbents think that it's beneath them or unworthy of consideration, right? And I think, legal, Hollywood, some of the stuff, writing, we've talked about, creative writing is an area where you probably see real disruption.
Great. All right, everybody, let's just review the themes so we have everybody can remember what we covered here. James, you want to start us off and review your themes?
Sure. I spoke about designers moving down the stack toward engineering, both in terms of prototyping and launching new internal tools. And I spoke about everyone wanting to own context. The war for context is just getting started. We're going to see lots of ways for people to block context from going to other companies and lots of new ways to share context. But
what's the distinction you're drawing? Not to rehash the whole thing, but context versus data. Like, what's the hard line you draw there?
I just call it context because I think agents just really need context, right? Like they want personal context about, cursor agents want personal context about your code base and your company style guides and who the engineers are and how you assign tasks and, as how you do documentation, right? That's context. So there's a lot of context. There's data in the world, right? That's what we scraped to create these things like ChatGPT. But then there's context where it's like this particular user of an agent or this particular type of task needs like more granular context, which just ends up either going into the context window. I mean, that's why they call it that, right? It's like, what's the most important data to look at while you're using an agent, right? So I don't know, war for context.
All right, Max, you want to review your themes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so along the lines of James's design, just discussing vibe coding, how real, how big, how much of the future is vibe coded. I had the super sexy Microsoft Office suite battle for the AI era.
That was great. I thought that was provocative.
Yeah. Open versus closed, all that good stuff. Yeah. And then finally, I think just the old distribution versus product discussion, talking about Uber, Waymo, Wave, other folks like that. And then I think, we got into some disruption sustaining narratives, which I think you hung on too.
Yeah, mine, I had text box versus product, this idea whether everybody should be copying ChatGPT or that's just sort of an entry point into a new technology that will return to well-designed tools. I
remember one comment on that, by the way, is I interviewed May Habib, writer, at our conference like 18 months ago, and she was like shitting on the enchatification of everything, as she called it, and like chat boxes have probably grown by a factor of
exactly. That was just the
300x since that point.
Theme 2 was the surveillance state, whether that's apps transcribing us or self-driving cars monitoring us. Just the desire for data obviously requires a level of surveillance that's new. And then my sort of overly colorful third theme was sprinting until the end of history. The sense that companies face competition from every direction. They have to keep moving. And yet there's sort of this hoped for endpoint where the technology is so transformative that whoever is in the strongest position is going to have a sort of insurmountable advantage.
Sounds good. That could be Francis Fukuyama's next book.
I love it. Yeah, exactly. I know. The end of history. It's overused. Great. Yeah, this is fun. I'm super excited for the conference on June 25th. We'll have videos out soon thereafter. Your podcast feed will get hit with some of our favorite ones. And I'm sure we'll ask far more wide-ranging questions. I mean, we're always also interested in just how are these people's companies doing? And we have lots of infrastructure people and people dealing with energy consumption. And so there were certainly a couple panels that I can tell are on people's minds, but a lot to cover at the conference in London. I'll see you guys in Europe.
See you soon. Excited.
See you there.
All right. Bye. Thanks, guys.